I remember the Ettins, born so long ago. In those ancient days they raised me. I remember 9 worlds, 9 Ettin wives, and the seed from which Yggdrasil sprang. It was at the very beginning. It was Ymir's time. There was no sand, no sea, no cooling waves, no earth, no sky, no grass, only Ginnungagap. Salutations. The concept of time is notoriously difficult to define. Parmenides and Zeno asserted that time and causality do not exist at all, because the very concept leads to apparent paradoxes. Isaac Newton proposed absolute time, of which relative time is derivative, while others proposed that time is nothing more than a function of our perception. The models used in modern science treat time and space as united in a self-contained whole, which besides its expansion is not so terribly different from what the classical Stoics and Platonists deduced, despite the idea being far from intuitive.
Not the kind of person to say I told us so, but you know what? I told us so. I told us so.
Aristotle avoids all this by defining time, or chronos, by its function as a measurement. Time is a measure of motion and of being moved, and it measures the motion by determining a motion which will measure exactly the whole motion, as the cubit does the length by determining an amount which will measure out the whole. Modern experimental physicists essentially agree with Aristotle on this functional definition of time, having whittled it down to a rather pithier, time is what a clock measures. Plotinus defined time in terms of motion or change as well, but in a wider context that encompasses all the activities of the Suka Cosmo, or Anima Mundi, and by extension everything that is contained within those activities, the sphere of generation. Would it then be sound to define time as the life of the soul, that is the Anima Mundi, in movement as it passes from one stage of act or experience to another? Yes. Saturn, who is the outermost planet known in late antiquity, is also the god that rules over time. He orbits around the entire cosmos, and all other motions are contained within his circular motion. The symbolism here is fairly obvious. Chronos is a circle that returns to its starting point, just as Cronus eats what he produces, that is, his children. Time is a self-contained and constant cycle that produces and contains all motions. Each cycle consists of smaller cycles, which themselves contain smaller cycles. The seasonal cycle of the year encompasses 12 cycles of the moon, and 365 cycles of day and night. The years are contained within ages or epochs, which begin and end with momentous events.
God, I never wanted to see this era again.
Now hold on, didn't the universe start 13.8 billion years ago? And won't it give way to entropy and stop existing? That's a straight line, not a circle. No real physicist will tell you that reality itself started at the Big Bang, only that all of time, space, matter and energy that we currently know about was concentrated in a single point. Reality existed, the physical universe was just relatively small from our current perspective. According to Nobel Prize-winning physicist Sir Roger Penrose, in his book Cycles of Time, mathematical models of the universe can be extended back beyond the Big Bang and forwards beyond heat death. Sir Penrose suggests that the Big Bang was caused by Hawking radiation from a previous cycle of the universe. There is possible physical evidence for this in anomalies called Hawking points. I've left a link in the description to an interview wherein he explains the concept better than I can. The mainstream model of space-time forwarded by physicists is eternal expansion. Almost all mathematical models that are made based on the basic assumptions of eternal expansion say that space-time branches off into a multiverse of separate bubbles, which themselves split off into more multiverses.
A single universe divides and becomes two, thus signifying the single greatest act of atom's creation.
This projection also conforms to the symbolism of Saturn, as despite him devouring his children, time returning to itself and abiding in itself, they are then sent forth out of Saturn and go on to rule over subsequent spans of time, as Jove overthrows Saturn and rules in the ages that follow. But a circular motion is not the same thing as a timeless eternity. The universal forms and numbers, the laws of logic and mathematics, true beauty and justice, the anima mundi, the intellect, the henads and the one itself stand above and beyond Chronos. physical reality depends on these things for its existence, so it cannot possibly contain them. Plato places the intellectual sphere in hyperuranion, viz. Beyond Uranus, who is the sky, outside of the sphere of Saturn, which constitutes the outer boundary of time and space. In the Timaeus, Plato refers to circular motions or cycles as images or imitations of eternity. Plotinus also stresses their distinct natures. Time, however, is not to be conceived as outside of soul. Eternity is not outside of the authentic existent, nor is it to be taken as a sequence or succession to soul, any more than eternity is to the divine. It is a thing seen upon soul, inherent, coeval to it, as eternity to the intellectual realm. Proclus makes the distinction crystal clear. For a temporal forever is one thing, and an eternal forever another, the latter being everything collectively and at once, but the former being co-extended with the whole continuity of time, and being infinite, and the latter subsisting in the now, but the former in interval, the interval being unceasing and always in generation, or coming to be. So how are we supposed to understand this being outside of time? We actually don't have to speculate. It's something that we, as conscious beings that participate in intellect, can actually experience firsthand, and in fact we already have.
Do you have the right time, old man? No.
Mircea Eliade, in The Sacred and the Profane, refers to circular time as profane time, and the eternity outside of it as sacred time. For religious man, time too, like space, is neither homogeneous nor continuous. On the one hand, there are intervals of sacred time, the time of festivals, by far the greater part of which are periodical. On the other, there is profane time, ordinary temporal duration, in which acts without religious meaning have their setting. Between these two kinds of time, there is, of course, solution and continuity, but by means of rites, religious man can pass without danger from ordinary temporal duration to sacred time. One essential difference between these two qualities of time strikes us immediately. By its very nature, sacred time is reversible in the sense that, properly speaking, it is a primordial mythical time made present. Every religious festival, every liturgical time, represents the reactualization of a sacred event that took place in the mythical past, in the beginning. Chronos, assimilated to Saturn, is the profane time to which Eliade refers. Chronological time is therefore the time that passes in materia, proceeding from past to future, measurable in cycles of years, months, days, and hours.
Real history.
The other state is not referred to as chronos, but as kairos. In popular usage, kairos is the proper time for an event, which can manifest at any point and is not bound to any specific part of chronological time. In the intellectual sphere, there is no chronos, there is only kairos, the perfect moment which never begins, ends, or passes. The events described in ancient mythology may be made manifest within chronos, but they do not belong to it. They are not historical but perpetual. They always were, always are, and always will be, as we see here from Sallust. But these mythological things indeed never took place at any particular time, because they have a perpetuity of subsistence, and intellect contemplates all things as subsisting together at once. But discourse considers this thing as first and that thing as second in the order of existence, or ontology.
You can't flash back to something that never happened. It's not fair.
This sacred time is described in the past tense because it is ontologically prior to the sphere of generation. This is what we mean by once upon a time. But importantly, as Eliade describes, Chronos is periodically renewed by Kairos. The beginning of every cycle of Chronos is like a watch being wound up by Kairos, after which it ticks back down to zero until the cycle ends, and is started again by Kairos.
And just like that, it's gone like an angel's kiss.
This happens in the universe naturally through the anima mundi, but when we mortals participate in ritual celebrations attuned to the cycles, we can tap into the eternal primordial moment and bring it into our own lives. When we do this, we let go of temporary things that wither and die, and we are united with timeless things that are perfect. Of particular importance is the winter festival that marks the transition from one year to the next. This represents the establishment of the cosmos from the primordial chaos by the demiurge, as described in my metaphysics video entitled Cosmos. Just as the demiurge establishes the natural order of the universe, when we participate in the yearly ritual that re-establishes this act, we build a new internal cosmos for ourselves, and reaffirm the place of natural law in our community. Several Native American tribes use the exact same word for year and world, so that when they want to say that the year is ending, they literally say that the world is ending. And when they want to say that a new year has started, they literally say that a new world has been created. The Egyptians were fully familiar with this duality. Their name for chronological time was Nechech.
Damn you, Chech!
Nechech is ruled over by Ra, the god of the sun, whose continuous death and rebirth produces not only day and night, but also the seasons and therefore the cycle of the year. Contrary to Nechech is Jet, which is ruled over by the god Osiris. Having been killed by his brother Set, Osiris is mummified, preserved in the same state forever. Thus, Jet is a single moment that never changes or passes, perfectly preserved. I've left a link in the description to a lecture about ancient Egyptian cosmology that mentions Nechech and Jet, and is also pertinent to earlier videos in this series regarding the cosmos. According to Nadler, the concept of the first time is comparable to that of the realm of being in which the Platonic ideas exist. In Egyptian thought, though, it is not abstract ideas that are found here, but living gods and archetypal relationships that obtain among them. The first time is the realm of metaphysical realities conceived in terms of symbolic images and myths. These are the patterns that are reflected in the mundane world, and that need to be participated in if mundane events are to be filled with archetypal power.
First time.
Although I would argue that everything he says of the Egyptians here is also true of the Platonists. These two states are readily observable in a vast number of unrelated cultural depictions. Viewers may be vaguely familiar with the Australian Aboriginal concept of dream time without really knowing what it actually is. Here is an explanation from the perspective of the Walbiri tribe. The Walbiri use the term Jugurba, which also means dream and story, to denote ancestral inhabitants of the country and the times in which they travelled around creating the world in which the present-day Walbiri now live. The contrast term Yijaru denotes the ongoing present or events within living memory. It also refers to waking experience in contrast to dreaming. Although Yijaru refers to the ordinary present, Jugurba also becomes present during ritual enactment or even when the myths are told. Eliade points to examples from the ceremonial medical practices of the Tikopia of Polynesia to the annual celebrations of the Babylonians and the Hittites. Speaking of the Babylonians, there exists an image of Nabu, their god of wisdom and writing, which bears an inscription containing the phrase, "What has been, will be."
I have been stabbed, shot, poisoned, frozen, hung, electrocuted, and burned.
Oh, really?
I should like to conclude by presenting two quotes from very different sources, one being Eliade himself as an expert on the traditional experience, and another being a complete outsider to the whole subject and a total speculator. In seeing how they overlap, I think an astute viewer will perceive the essential nature and paramount importance of this whole system. To revert to our immediate subject, we have no warrant for interpreting periodic return to the sacred time of origin as a rejection of the real world and an escape into dream and imagination. On the contrary, it seems to us that, here again, we can discern the ontological obsession to which we have referred and which, moreover, can be considered an essential characteristic of the man of the primitive and archaic societies. For to wish to reintegrate the time of origin is also to wish to return to the presence of the gods, to recover the strong, fresh, pure world that existed illo tempore, once upon a time. It is at once a thirst for the sacred and a nostalgia for being. I now have a theory that once upon a time we were real and alive, but departed into this state that we call existence, that we have carried over with us from the real existence, from which we died, the ideas of truth, and of axioms and principles and generalizations, ideas that really meant something when we were really alive, but that, of course, now, in our phantom existence, which is demonstrable by any X-ray photograph of any of us, can have only phantom meaning. So then our never-ending, but always frustrated search for our lost reality, we come upon chimera and mystification, but persistently have beliefs, as retentions from an experience in which there were things to believe in. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day. Here is an explanation from the perspective of... Here is an explanation from the perspective of... Here is an explanation from the perspective of the...